Hello, welcome to the Drowsy Professor. Tonight, we're journeying back nearly 400 million years to witness one of evolution's most remarkable achievements, the first tentative steps that life took from the ancient seas on a dry land. As you settle in, let me know where in the world and at what time you're watching. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. Picture yourself standing on a shore unlike any that exists in our modern world, where the boundary between water and land blurs into something altogether more mysterious and primordial. The year, if such measurements had meaning in this ancient time, would be approximately 385 million years ago, during the Middle Devonian period, when the Earth wore a very different face and the very concept of terrestrial life was still an experimental whisper in evolution's grand design. The air around you carries a warmth that speaks of a greenhouse world, where atmospheric carbon dioxide levels create a climate far more humid and tropical than anything our contemporary planet experiences. The temperature hovers consistently around 32 degrees Celsius, a bath-like warmth that extends from the equatorial regions almost to the poles, creating a planet where ice is virtually unknown and the seasons follow rhythms dictated more by the patterns of rainfall than by the familiar cycle of warm and cold that governs our modern world. The shoreline beneath your feet consists not of the familiar sand and pebbles of modern beaches, but of fine sediments and decomposing organic matter that create a soft, yielding surface that records every movement of the creatures that venture into this transitional zone between two worlds. The boundary between water and land is not a sharp demarcation, but rather a gradual transition that extends for hundreds of meters, creating vast tidal flats and shallow lagoons where the distinction between aquatic and terrestrial becomes beautifully ambiguous. The water that laps gently at this ancient shore is crystal clear, warmed by the relentless tropical sun and rich with dissolved minerals that support an abundance of life, forms found nowhere in our modern oceans. The chemistry of these Devonian seas differs substantially from contemporary seawater, with higher concentrations of certain elements and different pH levels that create optimal conditions for the evolution of organisms that can tolerate varying degrees of salinity and chemical composition. As your eyes adjust to this alien, yet strangely peaceful landscape, you begin to notice the extraordinary plant life that defines this Devonian world. The landward side of the shore is dominated not by grasses or familiar flowering plants, which have not yet evolved, but by vast forests of primitive plants that create a landscape of otherworldly beauty. Towering tree ferns stretch toward the sky like green umbrellas, their fronds creating a canopy that filters the intense sunlight into a gentle, dappled illumination that bathes the forest floor in ever-shifting patterns of light and shadow. Among these early forests, the first true trees are beginning to establish their presence, though they bear little resemblance to the oaks and pines that populate modern landscapes. These pioneering trees, members of groups called Archaeopteris and Calixylon, represent evolution's first experiments with woody growth and substantial height, creating the foundation for the complex forest ecosystems that will eventually support terrestrial animal life. Their bark is smooth and unmarked by the scars that insects and other animals will later create. For the creatures that will feed upon tree bark have not yet evolved the ability to live permanently on land. The understory of these ancient forests consists of a carpet of primitive plants that seem to bridge the gap between the aquatic and terrestrial worlds. Club mosses and horsetails, some growing to heights that dwarf their modern descendants, create a lush ground cover that retains moisture and provides the humid microclimate that many early land organisms require for survival. These plants lack the sophisticated vascular systems of modern vegetation, yet they have begun the crucial work of breaking down rock into soil and creating the foundation for more complex terrestrial ecosystems. The sound environment of this Devonian shore differs dramatically from the cacophony of modern coastal areas. There are no bird calls, for birds will not evolve for another 150 million years. There are no insect choruses, for most insects have not yet mastered the challenges of terrestrial life. Instead, the acoustic landscape consists primarily of the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, the whisper of wind through primitive vegetation, and the subtle creaking and rustling of the early forests as they sway in the warm breezes that carry the sense of decomposing organic matter and the mineral-rich waters of the ancient seas. The water itself teems with life forms that represent the cutting edge of evolutionary innovation. The shallow seas surrounding this ancient shore support communities of organisms that are experimenting with the adaptations that will eventually allow some of their descendants to venture on land. Primitive fish with increasingly sophisticated fin structures move through the warm waters, some beginning to develop the muscular and skeletal modifications that will eventually support weight-bearing locomotion on solid ground. Among these aquatic pioneers, certain species have begun to develop enlarged air bladders that can supplement gill respiration when dissolved oxygen levels in the water become inadequate. This adaptation initially evolved as a response to the occasionally oxygen-poor conditions that can develop in warm, shallow waters, represents one of the crucial pre-adaptations that will eventually make terrestrial life possible. These early experiments with air breathing occur not as a deliberate attempt to colonize land, but as practical solutions to the respiratory challenges that arise in the marginal aquatic environments where these creatures make their living. The tidal cycles that govern life in this transitional zone operate according to the same astronomical principles that drive modern tides. But the configuration of continents and ocean basins creates tidal patterns that differ substantially from those familiar to contemporary observers. The vast, shallow seas that characterize much of the Devonian world experience gentle, prolonged tidal cycles that create extensive intertidal zones where organisms can gradually adapt to periodic exposure to air and fluctuating water levels. During low tide periods, vast areas of the seafloor become exposed to air for hours at a time, creating natural laboratories where aquatic organisms can experiment with aerial existence. The creatures that find themselves stranded by retreating waters face the challenge of surviving until the tide returns, and those individuals with superior abilities to tolerate desiccation, breathe air, and move across exposed surfaces enjoy significant survival advantages that natural selection gradually amplifies across generations. The substrate of these tidal flats consists of fine mud and organic debris that provides ideal conditions for the preservation of tracks and traces that will eventually become some of our most important fossils documenting the transition from aquatic to terrestrial life. Every movement of a primitive fish struggling across a mudflat, every scrape mark left by a creature pulling itself along with muscular fins, becomes permanently recorded in the sediments that will eventually lithify into the rocks that paleontologists will study hundreds of millions of years in the future. The chemical composition of the atmosphere in this Devonian world differs significantly from the air we breathe today, with oxygen levels that fluctuate considerably throughout this period but generally remain lower than contemporary concentrations. The reduced oxygen content of Devonian air creates challenges for organisms attempting to extract sufficient oxygen for active metabolism, but it also reduces the risk of oxygen toxicity and creates atmospheric conditions that may actually facilitate certain aspects of the water-to-land transition. The carbon dioxide concentrations in this ancient atmosphere are substantially higher than those of our modern world, contributing to the greenhouse conditions that maintain warm temperatures across the entire planet, while also influencing the physiology of early land plants. The high carbon dioxide levels provide abundant raw material for photosynthesis, supporting the rapid growth and spread of early terrestrial vegetation, while also affecting the pH of rainwater and soil conditions in ways that influence the evolution of early terrestrial ecosystems. The soil formation processes that are beginning to operate in this Devonian world represent some of the earliest examples of terrestrial pedogenesis, as primitive plants begin the slow work of breaking down rock into the organic-rich substrates that will eventually support complex terrestrial ecosystems. The root systems of early land plants, while simple compared to modern vegetation, begin to create the physical and chemical weathering processes that transform bare rock into the foundations of terrestrial life. The water chemistry of the streams and rivers that flow across this ancient landscape reflects the absence of significant terrestrial vegetation in their watersheds, creating aquatic environments that are often quite different from the heavily vegetated waterways of more recent geological periods. These early freshwater systems provide crucial corridors that connect marine environments with the terrestrial habitats that are just beginning to develop, creating the intermediate conditions that facilitate the evolution of organisms capable of surviving in both aquatic and terrestrial environments. The seasonal patterns that govern this Devonian world operate according to astronomical cycles that remain constant throughout Earth's history, but the absence of polar ice caps and the global greenhouse conditions create seasonal variations that are expressed primarily through changes in rainfall patterns rather than temperature fluctuations. These seasonal rhythms of wet and dry periods create natural cycles of flooding and exposure that provide opportunities for aquatic organisms to experience terrestrial conditions on a temporary basis. The microscopic life that inhabits the sediments of these ancient shores includes communities of bacteria and other microorganisms that are pioneering the biochemical processes necessary for terrestrial life. These invisible organisms begin the crucial work of decomposing organic matter in terrestrial environments and establishing the nutrient cycling systems that will eventually support complex terrestrial food webs. As evening approaches in this ancient world and the warm tropical sun begins to sink toward the horizon, the shore takes on an ethereal quality that speaks to the profound transformation that is beginning to unfold. The gentle waves continue their eternal rhythm, carrying dissolved nutrients and microscopic life forms between the marine and terrestrial realms, while the primitive forests whisper with the movements of organisms that are just beginning to explore the possibilities that dry land offers to those brave enough to venture beyond the familiar embrace of their aquatic origins. In the warm, shallow waters that extend like liquid glass beneath the surface of this ancient Devonian sea, a revolution of extraordinary significance is quietly unfolding within the bodies of countless fish species that navigate these tropical waters with increasing sophistication. This transformation occurs not in the dramatic fashion of sudden evolutionary leaps, but through the patient accumulation of small anatomical refinements that gradually prepare certain lineages for an existence that extends beyond the boundaries of their aquatic birthright. The water temperature in these shallow seas maintains a consistent warmth of approximately 28 degrees Celsius, creating ideal conditions for the biological processes that drive rapid evolutionary experimentation. The elevated temperature increases metabolic rates and accelerates the developmental processes that allow beneficial mutations to express themselves more quickly, while also creating challenges for extracting adequate oxygen from water that holds less dissolved gas than the cooler waters of deeper marine environments. Within the bodies of primitive fish species that inhabit these warm shallows, specialized organs are beginning to evolve that will fundamentally alter the relationship between vertebrate life and the atmospheric environment. The swim bladders that many fish use for buoyancy control are gradually being modified by natural selection into organs capable of extracting oxygen directly from air, a capability that provides crucial survival advantages in environments where water oxygen levels can fluctuate dramatically due to temperature changes, algal blooms, and the decomposition of organic matter. The anatomical modifications that enable this revolutionary capability begin as subtle changes in the blood supply to existing swim bladders, as natural selection favors individuals whose swim bladders receive enhanced circulation that allows for more efficient gas exchange. The walls of these modified organs gradually become thinner and more permeable to gases, while developing the rich network of capillaries that characterizes the lungs of more advanced vertebrates. Picture a primitive fish, perhaps 30 centimeters in length, with scales that shimmer like polished copper in the filtered sunlight that penetrates the clear waters of this ancient sea. This creature represents thousands of generations of evolutionary refinement, and within its body cavity lies an organ that bridges the gap between the aquatic and aerial worlds. When dissolved oxygen levels in the surrounding water begin to decline due to the warming effects of the tropical sun or the respiratory demands of dense populations of aquatic organisms, this remarkable fish can rise to the surface and supplement its gill respiration with gulps of air that provide the additional oxygen necessary for active metabolism. The behavior associated with this air-breathing capability begins as simple surface-seeking responses triggered by declining water quality, but gradually evolves into more sophisticated behavioral patterns as natural selection favors individuals who can most efficiently utilize atmospheric oxygen. These early air breathers learn to time their surface visits to minimize exposure to aerial predators while maximizing the respiratory benefits of atmospheric gas exchange, developing behavioral strategies that will eventually prove crucial for survival in terrestrial environments. The neural adaptations that support air-breathing behavior involve modifications to the brainstem centers that control respiratory rhythms, allowing these pioneering vertebrates to coordinate the complex muscular actions required for aerial respiration while maintaining the gill ventilation patterns necessary for aquatic life. These neural innovations represent some of the earliest examples of the nervous system adaptations that will eventually enable vertebrates to master the sensory and motor challenges of terrestrial existence. The digestive modifications that accompany the evolution of air breathing often involve changes in gut anatomy that accommodate the altered buoyancy and body positioning that result from the presence of air-filled organs within the body cavity. The distribution of gases within the body affects swimming behavior and feeding strategies, requiring evolutionary adjustments to maintain optimal hydrodynamic performance while incorporating the benefits of atmospheric oxygen supplementation. The circulatory system adaptations that support efficient air breathing involve the evolution of increasingly sophisticated heart structures and blood vessel arrangements that can effectively distribute oxygen obtained from both gill and lung respiration throughout the body. The development of pulmonary circulation systems that can handle the different pressures and flow patterns associated with aerial gas exchange represents a crucial evolutionary innovation that prepares these organisms for the cardiovascular challenges of terrestrial life. The environmental conditions that favor the evolution of air-breathing capabilities include not only the warm, shallow waters where oxygen solubility is naturally reduced, but also the seasonal patterns of rainfall and evaporation that create temporary pools and isolated water bodies, where fish populations can become concentrated and deplete available dissolved oxygen. These marginal aquatic environments serve as evolutionary pressure cookers where the ability to utilize atmospheric oxygen provides enormous survival advantages. The chemical composition of the atmosphere during this Devonian period creates unique opportunities for organisms experimenting with aerial respiration, as the relatively low oxygen concentrations require more efficient extraction mechanisms, while the elevated carbon dioxide levels influence the pH balance of body fluids and affect the oxygen-carrying capacity of primitive blood systems. These atmospheric conditions may actually facilitate the evolution of air breathing by creating challenges that drive the development of more sophisticated respiratory systems. The social behaviors that begin to emerge among air-breathing fish species often involve cooperative strategies for sharing information about surface conditions and coordinating group surfacing behaviors that minimize predation risks while maximizing access to atmospheric oxygen. These early examples of respiratory cooperation represent the foundations of the social behaviors that will eventually characterize many terrestrial vertebrate communities. The predator-prey relationships that develop around air-breathing behaviors create new evolutionary pressures that shape both the morphology and behavior of these pioneering organisms. Predators learn to exploit the predictable surfacing behaviors of air-breathing fish, while the air breathers evolve increasingly sophisticated strategies for rapid surface visits and enhanced vigilance during vulnerable aerial exposure periods. The developmental biology of air-breathing organs reveals the remarkable evolutionary conservation of the genetic mechanisms that control organ formation, as the same developmental pathways that produce swim bladders are gradually modified to create the lung-like structures that enable atmospheric respiration. These developmental modifications often occur through changes in the timing and intensity of gene expression rather than through the evolution of entirely new genetic systems. The physiological challenges associated with extracting oxygen from air rather than water require extensive modifications to the biochemical systems that transport and utilize oxygen within vertebrate bodies. The hemoglobin molecules that carry oxygen in the blood undergo evolutionary refinements that enhance their affinity for oxygen at the lower partial pressures that characterize atmospheric environments, while cellular respiration systems adapt to utilize oxygen more efficiently. The sensory adaptations that accompany the evolution of air breathing often involve modifications to the lateral line systems and other mechanoreceptors that allow fish to detect changes in water currents and pressure waves. These sensory refinements become crucial for organisms that spend increasing amounts of time at the water's surface, where they must detect both aquatic and aerial threats while maintaining awareness of underwater environmental conditions. The reproductive strategies of air-breathing fish begin to show modifications that reflect the enhanced survival capabilities that atmospheric respiration provides, with some species developing extended parental care behaviors that take advantage of the improved oxygen delivery systems to support more intensive investment in offspring development. The ability to survive in marginal aquatic environments also opens up new reproductive habitats that were previously inaccessible to purely aquatic species. The seasonal patterns of air-breathing behavior often reflect the cyclical changes in water temperature and dissolved oxygen availability that characterize tropical shallow water environments. During the warmest periods of the year, when water oxygen levels reach their lowest points, air breathing becomes essential for survival, while cooler periods may allow these organisms to rely more heavily on gill respiration. The evolutionary arms race between respiratory efficiency and the energy costs of maintaining complex air-breathing systems creates ongoing selective pressures that drive the refinement of these remarkable organs. Natural selection favors individuals who can extract maximum respiratory benefit from minimum energy investment in air-breathing behaviors, leading to increasingly sophisticated and efficient atmospheric respiration systems. The biochemical innovations that support air breathing include the evolution of surfactant compounds that prevent the collapse of air-filled respiratory spaces, as well as modified mucus secretions that protect delicate respiratory surfaces from desiccation during aerial exposure. These chemical adaptations represent crucial innovations that will eventually prove essential for the transition to terrestrial life. The genetic regulatory systems that control the development and function of air-breathing organs undergo continuous evolutionary refinement as natural selection optimizes the expression patterns of genes involved in respiratory system formation. These regulatory modifications often have cascading effects on other organ systems, creating the integrated physiological changes necessary for successful adaptation to dual aquatic aerial lifestyles. The metabolic adaptations that accompany air-breathing evolution include modifications to cellular respiration pathways that allow for more efficient utilization of oxygen obtained from atmospheric sources, as well as changes in energy storage and utilization patterns that support the increased activity levels that enhanced oxygen availability makes possible. These metabolic innovations provide the energetic foundation for the more active lifestyles that will characterize terrestrial vertebrates. The immune system adaptations that develop in air-breathing fish reflect the need to defend against both aquatic and aerial pathogens, as exposure to atmospheric environments introduces new disease challenges, while the stress of respiratory transitions can compromise immune function. The evolution of more robust and flexible immune responses represents another crucial pre-adaptation for terrestrial life. The thermoregulatory challenges that accompany air-breathing behavior include the need to manage heat exchange during surface visits and the thermal effects of air-filled organs within the body cavity. These thermal management challenges drive the evolution of behavioral and physiological strategies that will eventually prove crucial for maintaining optimal body temperatures in terrestrial environments. As the gentle currents of this ancient sea carry these remarkable creatures through their daily routines of feeding, reproduction, and survival, each breath taken from the atmospheric realm above represents another small step in the extraordinary journey that will eventually lead their descendants to master the challenges of terrestrial existence, transforming the entire character of life on Earth through the power of respiratory innovation. In the dappled sunlight that filters through the clear waters of this Devonian lagoon, where depths rarely exceed 2 meters and the bottom consists of soft sediments rich with organic matter, we witness one of evolution's most remarkable architectural transformations unfolding within the bodies of pioneering vertebrates whose descendants will eventually walk upon dry land. This metamorphosis occurs not through sudden dramatic changes, but through the patient accumulation of structural modifications that gradually convert the paddle-like fins of aquatic creatures into the weight-bearing appendages that will support terrestrial locomotion. The water in this shallow lagoon maintains the perfect temperature for observing these evolutionary pioneers, a comfortable 26 degrees Celsius that supports active metabolism while remaining cool enough to hold adequate dissolved oxygen for creatures still dependent upon gill respiration. The clarity of the water allows sunlight to penetrate to the bottom, creating an underwater landscape illuminated with the golden radiance that makes every detail of these remarkable creatures visible as they navigate their aquatic environment with increasingly sophisticated locomotor strategies. Among the most fascinating inhabitants of this ancient lagoon are the lobe-finned fish, creatures whose muscular fins contain the skeletal elements that will eventually evolve into the arms and legs of terrestrial vertebrates. These magnificent animals, some reaching lengths of over a meter, possess fins that differ fundamentally from the thin, flexible fins of more typical fish species. Instead of being supported by simple fin rays, their fins contain robust internal skeletons with bone structures that mirror the basic pattern of limbs in all subsequent terrestrial vertebrates. Picture one of these remarkable creatures, perhaps Eusthenopteron, as it moves through the warm water with powerful undulations of its muscular body. Its pectoral fins, rather than serving merely as steering devices, function as primitive appendages capable of supporting significant weight and generating substantial propulsive force. The internal skeleton of each fin contains a single large bone corresponding to the humerus of terrestrial animals, followed by 2 bones equivalent to the radius and ulna, and a complex arrangement of smaller bones that prefigure the intricate structure of hands and feet. The muscular system that operates these proto-limbs represents a marvel of evolutionary engineering, with muscle groups arranged in patterns that allow for both the sweeping motions useful in aquatic locomotion and the more precise, controlled movements that will eventually enable terrestrial walking. The muscles that attach to the internal fin skeleton are substantially more robust than those found in typical fish fins, providing the strength necessary to support body weight and generate the forces required for movement across solid substrates. The nervous system that controls these increasingly sophisticated appendages undergoes continuous evolutionary refinement as natural selection favors individuals with enhanced motor control and coordination. The spinal cord segments that innervate the fins develop more complex neural circuits that can coordinate the intricate muscle contractions required for effective locomotion in both aquatic and semi-terrestrial environments. These neural adaptations represent crucial pre-adaptations for the sophisticated motor control that terrestrial locomotion will eventually require. The behavioral repertoire of these lobe-finned pioneers includes movements that clearly foreshadow terrestrial walking, as they use their muscular fins to push against the bottom substrate while moving through shallow water. During low tide periods, when water levels drop and expose large areas of the lagoon bottom, these remarkable creatures can be observed using their fins in ways that resemble primitive walking, supporting their body weight on their appendages while moving across exposed sediments in search of deeper water or stranded prey. The skeletal modifications that enable this enhanced appendage function involve not only changes to the fin skeleton itself, but also extensive reorganization of the vertebral column and rib cage to provide the structural support necessary for weight-bearing locomotion. The spine develops stronger vertebrae with more robust processes for muscle attachment, while the rib cage becomes more rigid to provide a stable platform for appendage movement and to protect internal organs during the mechanical stresses of terrestrial locomotion. The joint structures that connect the bones within these evolving appendages undergo remarkable refinements that enhance both flexibility and strength, developing the synovial joint systems that will characterize the limbs of all terrestrial vertebrates. These joints must be capable of supporting significant loads while maintaining the range of motion necessary for effective locomotion, requiring the evolution of sophisticated cartilage, ligament, and joint capsule systems that can withstand the mechanical demands of weight-bearing activity. The sensory feedback systems that guide appendage movement become increasingly sophisticated as these organs take on more complex functions, with the development of enhanced proprioceptive capabilities that allow precise awareness of limb position and movement. Specialized sensory receptors within muscles, joints, and skin provide the nervous system with detailed information about appendage orientation and mechanical loading, enabling the fine motor control that effective terrestrial locomotion requires. The circulatory adaptations that support these increasingly muscular appendages include the development of enhanced blood supply systems that can deliver adequate oxygen and nutrients to the large muscle masses while efficiently removing metabolic waste products. The blood vessels that serve these proto-limbs develop more sophisticated branching patterns and regulatory mechanisms that can adjust blood flow according to the varying demands of different types of locomotor activity. The developmental programs that guide the formation of these complex appendages involve intricate genetic regulatory systems that coordinate the growth and differentiation of multiple tissue types into integrated functional units. The same genetic toolkit that controls fin development gradually undergoes modifications that enhance bone formation, muscle differentiation, and joint development, creating the developmental foundation for the limbs of terrestrial vertebrates. The ecological pressures that drive the evolution of more sophisticated appendages include not only the challenges of locomotion in shallow water and temporarily exposed sediments, but also the opportunities presented by the rich food resources available in marginal aquatic environments. Stranded invertebrates, decomposing plant material, and smaller vertebrates trapped in tidal pools provide abundant nutrition for creatures capable of effective movement in these transitional habitats. The predator avoidance strategies that develop around enhanced appendage function include the ability to move rapidly across exposed surfaces to reach the safety of deeper water, as well as the capacity to navigate complex three-dimensional environments where traditional swimming locomotion would be ineffective. These survival advantages create strong selective pressures that favor continued refinement of appendage structure and function. The energy efficiency considerations that influence appendage evolution involve balancing the metabolic costs of maintaining large, muscular fins against the locomotor advantages they provide in marginal aquatic environments. Natural selection favors appendage designs that maximize functional capability while minimizing energy expenditure, leading to increasingly efficient muscle arrangements and skeletal geometries. The biomechanical principles that govern effective appendage function drive the evolution of bone shapes and muscle attachment sites that optimize force transmission and movement efficiency. The lever systems created by the internal fin skeleton undergo continuous refinement to maximize the mechanical advantage available for different types of locomotor activities, while joint geometries evolve to minimize energy losses during movement. The environmental conditions that favor the evolution of sophisticated appendages include not only the shallow, warm waters of tropical lagoons, but also the seasonal patterns of flooding and drying that characterize many Devonian aquatic environments. These cyclical changes in water level create regular opportunities for organisms to experience terrestrial conditions and develop the capabilities necessary for survival in exposed environments. The reproductive advantages that enhanced appendage function provides include the ability to access isolated breeding sites that are unavailable to less mobile aquatic organisms, as well as improved parental care capabilities that result from enhanced mobility and environmental control. These reproductive benefits create additional selective pressures that accelerate the evolution of sophisticated appendage systems. The physiological challenges associated with supporting body weight on appendages rather than relying on water for buoyancy require extensive modifications to cardiovascular and respiratory systems that can meet the increased energy demands of terrestrial locomotion. The heart and lung systems of these pioneering organisms undergo evolutionary changes that prepare them for the elevated metabolic requirements of active terrestrial life. The thermoregulatory implications of enhanced appendage musculature include both the heat production associated with active muscle contraction and the thermal challenges of operating in environments where water is not available for heat dissipation. These thermal management challenges drive the evolution of behavioral and physiological strategies that will eventually prove crucial for maintaining optimal body temperatures in terrestrial environments. The immune system adaptations that accompany the evolution of sophisticated appendages reflect the increased exposure to environmental pathogens and the elevated risk of injury associated with more active lifestyles and contact with abrasive substrates. The development of enhanced wound healing capabilities and more robust pathogen resistance represents another crucial component of the transition toward terrestrial life. The social behaviors that develop around enhanced mobility include cooperative strategies for navigating challenging terrain and sharing information about optimal routes and resource locations. These early examples of terrestrial cooperation provide the behavioral foundation for the complex social systems that will eventually characterize many terrestrial vertebrate communities. The sensory enhancements that accompany appendage evolution include improvements to visual, tactile, and chemosensory systems that support effective navigation in complex terrestrial environments. The ability to detect substrate texture, slope, and stability becomes crucial for safe and efficient terrestrial locomotion, driving the evolution of sophisticated sensory capabilities. The metabolic innovations that support enhanced appendage function include modifications to energy storage and utilization systems that can provide the sustained power output required for terrestrial locomotion while maintaining the energy reserves necessary for survival during periods of environmental stress. These metabolic adaptations represent crucial preparations for the energetic demands of terrestrial life. As these remarkable creatures continue their patient exploration of the possibilities that lie beyond the boundaries of their aquatic origins, each movement of their increasingly sophisticated appendages writes another line in the story of vertebrate evolution, gradually constructing the anatomical and physiological foundation that will eventually support the magnificent diversity of terrestrial life that will populate our planet for hundreds of millions of years to come. The moment arrives with the quiet dignity that characterizes all of evolution's greatest achievements, unmarked by fanfare or ceremony, witnessed only by the ancient sun that has observed countless such transformations across the vast expanse of geological time. In the gentle warmth of a Devonian afternoon, when the temperature hovers at a perfect 24 degrees Celsius and the humidity creates an atmosphere thick with the promise of rain, a remarkable creature slowly emerges from the crystal-clear waters of a shallow lagoon and takes its first tentative steps onto the soft, yielding surface of dry land. This pioneer, perhaps 40 centimeters in length and bearing the unmistakable characteristics of its aquatic heritage, represents the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary preparation. Its body, still streamlined for swimming, glistens with moisture in the filtered sunlight that penetrates the canopy of primitive plants growing along the water's edge. The scales that cover its skin shimmer like polished pewter, each one perfectly adapted for life in water, yet beginning to show the modifications that will eventually allow terrestrial existence. The appendages that support this momentous venture onto land have evolved far beyond the simple fins of its ancestors. Yet they retain enough aquatic functionality to ensure that retreat to the safety of water remains always possible. Each limb, supported by an internal skeleton of remarkable sophistication, moves with deliberate precision as the creature tests the stability of the substrate beneath its feet. The muscles that power these movements ripple beneath the skin with each careful step, demonstrating the strength that has been gradually accumulated through countless generations of evolutionary refinement. The substrate upon which this historic journey unfolds consists of fine sediments and decomposing organic matter that create an ideal surface for these first experiments in terrestrial locomotion. The soft mud yields slightly under the creature's weight, providing stability without the harsh resistance that harder surfaces would present. Ancient plant debris and fragments of primitive vegetation create a carpet that retains moisture while offering the traction necessary for effective movement across the unfamiliar terrain of dry land. The sensory experience of terrestrial existence must represent an overwhelming flood of new information for a nervous system evolved to interpret aquatic environments. The air that now surrounds the creature's body carries sense and chemical signals entirely different from those found in water, while the absence of buoyancy creates entirely new sensations of weight and mechanical stress. The skin, accustomed to the constant pressure and support of surrounding water, now experiences the alien sensation of air contact and the beginning of the desiccation challenges that will drive so many future evolutionary adaptations. The respiratory system that has recently evolved to extract oxygen from air now faces its ultimate test as the creature ventures beyond the reach of water-based respiration. The primitive lungs, still simple compared to the sophisticated organs that will characterize later terrestrial vertebrates, work steadily to extract life-sustaining oxygen from the humid air, while the gill slits, though no longer immersed in water, continue to flutter with the reflexive movements that have governed breathing throughout this creature's aquatic existence. The visual experience of terrestrial life presents an entirely new perspective on the world, as eyes adapted for underwater vision struggle to accommodate the different optical properties of air and the intense brightness of unfiltered sunlight. The creature's pupils contract reflexively as it adjusts to light levels far higher than those found even in the clear, shallow water, while its brain works to interpret visual information that lacks the familiar context of aquatic surroundings. The thermal challenges of aerial existence become immediately apparent as the creature's body begins to lose heat through evaporation and radiation at rates that never occur in water. The large thermal mass of aquatic environments provides automatic temperature regulation, but air offers no such buffering, requiring behavioral and physiological adjustments that represent entirely new challenges for a vertebrate nervous system. The creature instinctively seeks the shade provided by overhanging vegetation, demonstrating the beginning of the thermoregulatory behaviors that will become essential for terrestrial survival. The gravitational effects of terrestrial existence create mechanical stresses that the creature's musculoskeletal system has never before experienced, as the absence of water's buoyant support means that every movement must work against the full force of gravity. The spine, evolved to provide flexibility for swimming motions, now faces the challenge of supporting the entire body weight without external support, while the appendages must generate not only forward propulsion, but also the vertical forces necessary to counteract gravitational pull. The substrate beneath the creature's feet tells its own story of evolutionary transition, as the organic matter that cushions each step consists largely of the remains of early land plants that have already completed their own remarkable journey from aquatic to terrestrial existence. These plant pioneers have prepared the way for animal life by creating the soil conditions and atmospheric modifications that make terrestrial vertebrate existence possible, demonstrating the interconnected nature of all evolutionary progress. The moisture content of the air surrounding this historic venture remains high enough to prevent immediate desiccation, yet low enough to create the gradual water loss that will drive the evolution of sophisticated integumentary adaptations in future terrestrial vertebrates. The creature's skin, evolved for life in water, begins to experience the gradual loss of body fluids that represents one of the greatest challenges facing any organism attempting to colonize terrestrial environments. The microbial communities that inhabit the terrestrial substrate present entirely new challenges and opportunities for the evolving vertebrate immune system, as bacteria and other microorganisms adapted for terrestrial existence differ substantially from their aquatic counterparts. The creature's immune system, evolved to combat aquatic pathogens, must now adapt to defend against terrestrial disease organisms while also learning to coexist with the beneficial microbes that will eventually prove essential for terrestrial life. The plant life that surrounds this momentous event creates a cathedral-like atmosphere of organic tranquility, as primitive trees and ground-covering vegetation filter the sunlight into gentle patterns that dance across the forest floor. The early horsetails and club mosses that dominate the understory create a landscape that seems to bridge the gap between aquatic and terrestrial worlds, their moisture-loving nature providing the humid microclimate that facilitates this crucial transition. The invertebrate communities that have already established themselves in these terrestrial environments provide both opportunities and challenges for the pioneering vertebrate, as potential prey species offer new food sources, while potential predators present threats that differ substantially from those found in aquatic environments. The arthropods that scuttle through the leaf litter represent evolutionary experiments in terrestrial living that parallel the vertebrate transition, creating a complex web of ecological relationships that will eventually support sophisticated terrestrial ecosystems. The energy expenditure required for terrestrial locomotion proves substantially greater than that needed for swimming, as the creature must work against gravity and friction while lacking the mechanical advantages that water density provides for aquatic propulsion. Each step requires careful calculation of energy investment versus distance gained, creating selective pressures that will drive the evolution of increasingly efficient terrestrial locomotion strategies. The navigational challenges of terrestrial existence include the need to maintain orientation without the three-dimensional reference points that characterize aquatic environments, while also developing new strategies for returning to water when environmental conditions become challenging. The creature's nervous system begins to develop the spatial mapping capabilities that will eventually allow terrestrial vertebrates to navigate complex landscapes and remember the locations of crucial resources. The feeding opportunities that terrestrial environments provide include access to plant material and invertebrate prey that are unavailable to purely aquatic organisms. Yet the mechanical challenges of terrestrial feeding require substantial modifications to feeding behaviors and digestive physiology. The creature's jaw muscles, evolved for capturing aquatic prey, must adapt to processing the different textures and chemical compositions that characterize terrestrial food sources. The social implications of this terrestrial venture remain largely unexplored, as the creature that takes these first steps represents only the beginning of the social evolution that will eventually produce the complex terrestrial vertebrate communities of future geological periods. However, the basic behavioral flexibility that allows for terrestrial exploration suggests the cognitive capabilities that will eventually support sophisticated terrestrial social behaviors. The reproductive implications of terrestrial capability include access to breeding sites that are protected from aquatic predators and environmental fluctuations, while also presenting new challenges related to egg development in aerial environments and the protection of vulnerable offspring during extended terrestrial phases of their life cycles. These reproductive considerations will drive many of the most important evolutionary innovations in the transition from aquatic to terrestrial life. The seasonal advantages that terrestrial capability provides include the ability to exploit temporarily exposed habitats during dry periods and to access resources that become available when water levels recede. These temporal opportunities create selective advantages that favor individuals with enhanced terrestrial capabilities, driving the continued evolution of adaptations that support increasingly sophisticated terrestrial lifestyles. The communication possibilities that terrestrial existence enables include acoustic signaling through air rather than water, opening up entirely new channels for information exchange, while also creating new vulnerabilities to predation by organisms capable of detecting and interpreting aerial sound signals. The evolution of terrestrial communication systems will eventually prove crucial for the social coordination that characterizes many advanced terrestrial vertebrate communities. The metabolic adjustments required for terrestrial existence include modifications to cellular respiration pathways that can efficiently utilize oxygen extracted from air rather than water, while also managing the increased energy demands associated with gravitational work and the reduced thermal stability of aerial environments. These metabolic innovations represent fundamental changes to vertebrate physiology that will influence all subsequent terrestrial evolution. As this remarkable pioneer continues its exploration of the terrestrial realm, Each movement across the yielding substrate represents not just an individual venture, but a species-wide experiment that will ultimately determine whether vertebrate life can successfully master the challenges and opportunities that dry land provides, setting the stage for the magnificent radiation of terrestrial vertebrates that will eventually populate every corner of our planet. In the gentle twilight of this ancient Devonian world, as the warm air carries the rich scents of decomposing vegetation and the mineral essence of nearby waters, we witness the emergence of life forms that embody the perfect balance between aquatic heritage and terrestrial possibility. These are the amphibious pioneers, creatures that have mastered the art of existing comfortably in both realms, their lives unfolding as graceful transitions between the familiar embrace of water and the challenging opportunities that dry land provides. The temperature of this late Devonian evening settles into an ideal 22 degrees Celsius, warm enough to support active metabolism, yet cool enough to reduce the desiccation stress that represents one of the greatest challenges facing any organism attempting to divide its existence between aquatic and terrestrial environments. The humidity remains high, approaching 90%, creating atmospheric conditions that minimize water loss while providing the moist microclimate that these transitional creatures require for successful dual habitat living. Among the most remarkable of these amphibious pioneers are the early tetrapods, creatures whose very name speaks to their revolutionary innovation. Four-footed vertebrates that represent evolution's first successful experiment in true terrestrial locomotion. These magnificent animals, some reaching lengths of over a meter, demonstrate anatomical features that perfectly balance the requirements of both aquatic and terrestrial existence, their bodies serving as living bridges between two fundamentally different worlds. Picture Acanthostega, one of these early tetrapods, as it moves with fluid grace through the shallow waters of a quiet lagoon before emerging onto the soft substrate of the surrounding wetland. Its body, still elongated and streamlined like that of its fish ancestors, retains the lateral compression that enables efficient swimming. Yet its limbs have evolved into true appendages capable of supporting terrestrial locomotion. Each foot bears 8 toes, more than the 5 that will eventually become standard for terrestrial vertebrates, demonstrating the experimental nature of these early terrestrial adaptations. The skeletal structure of these amphibious pioneers reveals the remarkable engineering challenges that evolution has solved in creating organisms capable of functioning effectively in both aquatic and terrestrial environments. The vertebral column has evolved to provide the structural support necessary for terrestrial locomotion while maintaining the flexibility required for efficient swimming. The ribs have become more robust to protect internal organs during the mechanical stresses of terrestrial movement, yet they retain enough flexibility to accommodate the body deformations necessary for aquatic propulsion. The muscular system that powers these dual habitat lifestyles represents a masterpiece of biological engineering, with muscle groups arranged to provide both the undulatory contractions necessary for swimming and the more complex coordination required for terrestrial walking. The axial muscles that drive swimming motions work in harmony with the appendicular muscles that control limb movement, creating integrated locomotor systems that can transition seamlessly between aquatic and terrestrial movement patterns. The respiratory system of these amphibious creatures demonstrates remarkable sophistication in managing the oxygen extraction requirements of both aquatic and terrestrial existence. The gills that enabled their ancestors to extract dissolved oxygen from water remain functional, though often reduced in size and efficiency, while the lungs that allow atmospheric breathing have become more sophisticated and reliable. The coordination between these two respiratory systems requires neural control mechanisms of extraordinary complexity. The nervous system adaptations that support amphibious living include sensory processing capabilities that can interpret information from both aquatic and terrestrial environments, often simultaneously. The lateral line system that detects water movement and pressure changes remains functional during aquatic phases, while enhanced tactile and proprioceptive systems provide the sensory feedback necessary for effective terrestrial locomotion. The skin of these remarkable creatures serves multiple functions that reflect the challenges of dual habitat existence, acting as a permeable membrane that can supplement gill and lung respiration while also providing protection against the desiccation and mechanical damage that characterize terrestrial environments. The mucus secretions that keep the skin moist and functional undergo constant regulation to maintain optimal hydration levels in varying environmental conditions. The circulatory system of amphibious tetrapods demonstrates remarkable adaptations that enable efficient oxygen transport regardless of whether that oxygen is obtained from water or air. The heart begins to show the structural modifications that will eventually lead to the complete separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, while blood vessel arrangements adapt to support the circulation changes associated with transitions between aquatic and terrestrial activity. The feeding strategies employed by these amphibious pioneers reflect the diverse food opportunities available to organisms capable of hunting in both aquatic and terrestrial environments. Their jaws and teeth retain many of the characteristics that made their ancestors successful aquatic predators. Yet they also show modifications that enable the capture and processing of terrestrial prey items, such as arthropods, worms, and other invertebrates that inhabit the margins between land and water. The reproductive strategies of early tetrapods demonstrate the conservative approach that characterizes many evolutionary transitions, with most species continuing to rely on aquatic environments for egg-laying and larval development, while adults gain increasing independence from water for their daily activities. This reproductive strategy provides a safety net that allows experimentation with terrestrial living while maintaining the proven success of aquatic reproduction. The larval development of these creatures often recapitulates their evolutionary history, with young individuals beginning life as purely aquatic organisms with external gills and fish-like characteristics before gradually developing the terrestrial capabilities that characterize adults. This ontogenetic progression provides insights into the evolutionary pathway that led from aquatic ancestors to terrestrial descendants. The habitat selection behaviors of amphibious tetrapods reflect sophisticated understanding of the environmental requirements for successful dual habitat living, with individuals choosing locations that provide easy access to both aquatic and terrestrial resources while minimizing exposure to the specific dangers that characterize each environment. These behavioral adaptations represent crucial innovations that enable effective exploitation of marginal habitats. The seasonal activity patterns of these remarkable creatures often involve migrations between different habitat types as environmental conditions change throughout the year, with some species spending wet seasons in more terrestrial environments and dry seasons in aquatic refugia. These seasonal movements require navigation abilities and environmental awareness that demonstrate considerable cognitive sophistication. The predator avoidance strategies employed by amphibious tetrapods must account for threats from both aquatic and terrestrial predators, requiring behavioral flexibility and sensory awareness that exceeds what purely aquatic or terrestrial organisms need to maintain. The ability to escape into either water or onto land provides tactical advantages that often prove crucial for survival in environments where multiple predator types are active. The thermoregulatory challenges faced by creatures that transition between aquatic and terrestrial environments require sophisticated behavioral and physiological strategies that can maintain optimal body temperatures despite the very different thermal properties of water and air. Behavioral thermoregulation becomes particularly important, with individuals learning to use microclimates and environmental features to maintain comfortable body temperatures. The metabolic demands of supporting both aquatic and terrestrial locomotory systems create energy requirements that influence feeding behavior, habitat selection, and activity patterns in ways that demonstrate the complex trade-offs involved in dual habitat living. The energy costs of maintaining functional systems for both environments must be balanced against the benefits that habitat flexibility provides. The social behaviors that begin to emerge among amphibious tetrapods include cooperative strategies for locating optimal habitat areas and sharing information about resource availability and predator threats. These early examples of terrestrial social cooperation provide the foundation for the more complex social systems that will eventually characterize many terrestrial vertebrate groups. The communication systems that develop in amphibious environments must function effectively in both aquatic and terrestrial contexts, leading to the evolution of multimodal signaling strategies that can convey information through waterborne vibrations, airborne sounds, visual displays, and chemical signals. The development of these sophisticated communication capabilities represents another crucial step toward fully terrestrial existence. The immune system challenges associated with exposure to both aquatic and terrestrial pathogens require enhanced disease resistance capabilities and more flexible immune responses than those needed by organisms that inhabit only a single environment type. The evolution of more robust and adaptable immune systems represents another crucial adaptation for successful terrestrial colonization. The developmental flexibility that allows successful adaptation to varying environmental conditions during growth and maturation demonstrates the remarkable plasticity that characterizes these evolutionary pioneers. With individuals capable of adjusting their developmental trajectories in response to environmental cues that indicate whether aquatic or terrestrial specialization will prove most advantageous. The genetic regulatory systems that control the expression of aquatic versus terrestrial characteristics undergo continuous refinement as natural selection optimizes the balance between these alternative adaptive strategies. The ability to activate different developmental programs in response to environmental conditions represents a crucial innovation that enables successful amphibious living. The ecological roles that amphibious tetrapods play in their ecosystems include both aquatic and terrestrial functions, making them important links in food webs that span the boundary between these two habitat types. Their ability to transport nutrients and energy between aquatic and terrestrial environments contributes to ecosystem productivity and stability in ways that purely aquatic or terrestrial organisms cannot achieve. The evolutionary significance of these amphibious pioneers extends far beyond their immediate ecological impact, as they represent crucial steps in the evolutionary pathway that will eventually lead to the complete colonization of terrestrial environments by vertebrate life. Their innovations in locomotion, respiration, reproduction, and sensory processing provide the foundation for all subsequent terrestrial vertebrate evolution. As night falls over this ancient wetland, and these remarkable creatures settle into their evening routines of feeding and shelter seeking, their very existence demonstrates that evolution's greatest achievements often occur not through dramatic revolutionary changes, but through the patient refinement of transitional strategies that enable life to gradually expand into new realms of possibility, creating stepping stones toward futures that surpass anything their present circumstances might suggest. As we journey forward through the vast expanse of geological time, the world transforms around us with the patient inevitability that characterizes all planetary evolution. The late Devonian period gradually gives way to the Carboniferous, and with this transition comes one of the most remarkable transformations in the history of terrestrial life. The scattered groves and modest wetland forests of the Devonian world expand and flourish into vast, cathedral-like sanctuaries of vegetation that will provide the perfect nursery for the continuing evolution of terrestrial vertebrates. The atmospheric conditions that prevail during this Carboniferous period create an environment unlike anything that exists in our modern world, with oxygen concentrations rising to levels that approach 35% of the total atmosphere, compared to the 21% that characterizes contemporary air. This oxygen-rich environment supports biological processes of extraordinary vigor and enables the growth of plants and animals to sizes that would be impossible under current atmospheric conditions. Picture yourself standing beneath the towering canopy of a Carboniferous forest, where the trees around you stretch toward the sky with a majesty that rivals the greatest cathedrals ever constructed by human hands. These are not the familiar oak and pine forests of more recent geological periods, but rather ancient assemblages of plant life that represent evolution's first grand experiments in creating complex terrestrial ecosystems. The dominant trees, members of groups called Lepidodendron and Sigillaria, rise to heights exceeding 30 meters, their straight trunks marked with the distinctive diamond-shaped scars left by fallen leaves. The understory of this ancient forest creates a world of perpetual twilight, with a light that filters through multiple layers of vegetation, takes on a greenish hue that bathes everything in an ethereal glow. Giant tree ferns spread their fronds like living umbrellas, some reaching heights of 15 meters and creating secondary canopy layers that support their own communities of epiphytic plants and small animals. The ground beneath this verdant ceiling remains perpetually moist and soft, covered with a thick carpet of decomposing vegetation that creates ideal conditions for the countless organisms that make their living in the forest floor ecosystem. The temperature within this forest sanctuary remains remarkably stable throughout both daily and seasonal cycles, hovering around 26 degrees Celsius during the day and dropping only slightly during nighttime hours. The high humidity that characterizes this environment, often exceeding 95%, creates an atmosphere that feels almost liquid in its density and moisture content. This thermal and hydrological stability provides ideal conditions for the amphibious tetrapods that are continuing their evolutionary journey toward full terrestrial capability. The acoustic environment of the Carboniferous forest differs dramatically from the familiar sounds of modern woodlands, as the groups of animals that will eventually provide the majority of forest sounds have not yet evolved or remain in early stages of terrestrial adaptation. Instead of bird songs and mammalian calls, the forest resonates with the gentle sounds of wind moving through primitive vegetation, the soft splash of water droplets falling from saturated leaves, and the subtle rustling of the first terrestrial arthropods as they move through the leaf litter. The arthropod communities that inhabit these ancient forests include some of the most spectacular creatures ever to walk the earth, as the oxygen-rich atmosphere enables insects and their relatives to achieve sizes that would be impossible in our current world. Dragonflies with wingspans exceeding 60 centimeters patrol the forest clearings like miniature aircraft, while millipedes over 2 meters in length move slowly through the understory vegetation, processing enormous quantities of dead plant material and contributing to the nutrient cycling that maintains forest productivity. The plant communities that create these forest sanctuaries demonstrate remarkable diversity and complexity, with different species specialized for every available ecological niche from the forest floor to the emergent canopy. The dominant trees, though lacking the sophisticated vascular systems of modern woody plants, achieve their impressive sizes through innovative structural solutions that prefigure many of the engineering principles that will characterize later forest ecosystems. The seed ferns that populate the middle canopy layers represent evolution's first experiments with seed-based reproduction, providing enhanced reproductive reliability that enables these plants to colonize new areas more effectively than their spore-dependent predecessors. These remarkable plants combine characteristics of both ferns and seed plants, demonstrating the transitional nature of many Carboniferous organisms. The moisture regime that characterizes these forests creates conditions that remain optimal for amphibious vertebrates, while also providing the environmental stability necessary for the evolution of increasingly terrestrial adaptations. Standing water collects in countless depressions throughout the forest floor, creating temporary and permanent pools that serve as breeding sites and refugia for amphibious species, while also supporting diverse communities of aquatic invertebrates. The soil development processes that operate within these forests create some of the richest terrestrial substrates ever to exist on Earth, as the rapid decomposition of enormous quantities of plant material in the warm, humid conditions produces organic rich soils that can support extraordinary biological productivity. The earthworms and other soil organisms that process this organic matter create soil structures and nutrient cycling systems that will persist long after the Carboniferous forests themselves have vanished. The light environment within these dense forests creates a complex mosaic of illumination conditions that range from the bright clearings where fallen trees have created gaps in the canopy to the deep shade of the forest interior, where light levels may be less than 1% of those found in open areas. This diversity of light conditions enables the coexistence of plant species with vastly different photosynthetic requirements and creates the habitat diversity necessary to support complex animal communities. The early tetrapods that inhabit these forest sanctuaries demonstrate remarkable diversification as they adapt to the numerous ecological opportunities that complex forest ecosystems provide. Some species become specialized for life in the perpetually moist forest floor environment, developing enhanced terrestrial capabilities while retaining the ability to exploit aquatic microhabitats. Others adapt to more arboreal lifestyles, developing enhanced climbing abilities that enable them to exploit the three-dimensional habitat opportunities that forests provide. The feeding opportunities available within these forests include not only the abundant arthropod prey that inhabits every level of the forest ecosystem, but also the plant material that provides the foundation for complex food webs. Some tetrapods begin to experiment with herbivorous diets, developing the digestive modifications necessary to extract nutrition from plant material, while others become specialized predators that exploit the diverse communities of forest invertebrates. The reproductive strategies that evolve within forest environments often take advantage of the stable microclimates and abundant moisture that these ecosystems provide, with some species developing terrestrial reproduction strategies that free them from dependence on standing water for breeding success. The evolution of eggs with protective shells and internal development represents one of the most important innovations in the transition toward full terrestrial independence. The shelter opportunities that forests provide include not only the obvious protection from weather and predators that dense vegetation offers, but also the complex three-dimensional habitat structure that enables effective niche partitioning among different species. Hollow logs, dense vegetation thickets, and the spaces beneath fallen trees create countless microhabitats that can support specialized communities of forest organisms. The seasonal dynamics that govern forest ecosystems create temporal patterns of resource availability and environmental conditions that drive the evolution of sophisticated behavioral adaptations in forest-dwelling tetrapods. The timing of reproductive activities, feeding behaviors, and movement patterns becomes increasingly complex as these organisms learn to exploit the temporal as well as spatial dimensions of forest habitat diversity. The predator-prey relationships that develop within forest ecosystems include both terrestrial and semi-aquatic predators, creating complex selective pressures that drive the evolution of diverse defensive strategies among forest-dwelling tetrapods. The ability to climb trees, hide in dense vegetation, or escape into water becomes crucial for survival in environments where multiple predator types may be active simultaneously. The dispersal mechanisms that enable tetrapods to move between different forest areas and colonize new habitats benefit from the connectivity that forest ecosystems provide, as continuous vegetation cover enables movement across large geographic areas without exposure to the harsh conditions that characterize more open environments. This enhanced dispersal capability accelerates the geographic spread of terrestrial vertebrates and facilitates the genetic exchange that promotes evolutionary innovation. The coevolutionary relationships that develop between forest-dwelling tetrapods and the plant communities that provide their habitat include both direct interactions, such as seed dispersal, and indirect effects, such as nutrient cycling through animal waste products. These relationships demonstrate the interconnected nature of forest ecosystems and highlight the importance of animal-plant interactions in maintaining ecosystem stability and productivity. The microclimatic conditions that exist within different parts of the forest create opportunities for ecological specialization that drive adaptive radiation among forest-dwelling tetrapods, with different species adapting to the specific temperature, humidity, and light conditions that characterize particular forest microhabitats. This environmental heterogeneity enables the coexistence of multiple species within the same general area, while promoting the evolution of specialized adaptations. The carbon cycling processes that operate within these forests create some of the most important geological deposits in Earth's history, as the rapid burial of plant material in swampy conditions leads to the formation of the coal deposits that will eventually provide much of the energy that powers human industrial civilization. The tetrapods that inhabit these forests witness and participate in the creation of these geological treasures. The evolutionary innovations that emerge within forest environments include enhanced sensory capabilities for navigating complex three-dimensional environments, improved motor control for climbing and maneuvering through dense vegetation, and the social behaviors that enable effective exploitation of forest resources. These innovations provide the foundation for the spectacular adaptive radiation of terrestrial vertebrates that will characterize later geological periods. The conservation of moisture that forest environments enable becomes increasingly important as global climate conditions begin to show the first signs of the drying trends that will eventually challenge many amphibious species, making forest refugia crucial for the survival of lineages that will eventually give rise to fully terrestrial vertebrates. The forests serve as evolutionary nurseries where the innovations necessary for terrestrial life can develop under protected conditions. As dawn breaks through the misty canopy of this ancient forest, and the first rays of sunlight create shafts of golden illumination that penetrate the humid air, the countless organisms that call this sanctuary home begin another day of the patient evolutionary work that will eventually transform these primitive experiments in terrestrial living into the magnificent diversity of land-dwelling vertebrates that will inherit the Earth. Within the protective embrace of these Carboniferous forest sanctuaries, the descendants of those first brave pioneers who ventured from water onto land continue their remarkable evolutionary journey, gradually acquiring the sophisticated adaptations that will eventually enable vertebrate life to thrive in terrestrial environments far removed from the aquatic origins that shaped their ancestry. This transformation unfolds not as a single dramatic change, but as an intricate tapestry of countless small innovations that collectively revolutionize every aspect of vertebrate biology. The morning air within the forest carries the rich sense of decomposing vegetation and the mineral essence of moisture-laden soil, while the temperature maintains its stable warmth at 27 degrees Celsius. The humidity remains extraordinarily high, creating an atmosphere that still provides the moist conditions that these evolving terrestrial vertebrates require, yet challenging them to develop increasingly sophisticated mechanisms for managing water balance in environments where desiccation represents a constant threat. The integumentary revolution that transforms the relationship between vertebrate bodies and their environment represents one of the most fundamental changes occurring during this period of terrestrial adaptation. The skin of early terrestrial vertebrates undergoes remarkable modifications that enable it to serve multiple functions simultaneously, providing protection against mechanical damage, regulating water loss, enabling gas exchange, and defending against pathogens and parasites that characterize terrestrial environments. The development of increasingly sophisticated skin structures begins with modifications to the mucus-secreting systems that amphibious ancestors used to maintain skin moisture during brief terrestrial excursions. These secretions become more complex and specialized, with some components providing waterproofing functions while others maintain the antimicrobial properties necessary for defense against terrestrial pathogens. The evolution of these chemical defense systems represents a crucial innovation that enables successful colonization of environments where diverse microbial communities pose new challenges to vertebrate health. The keratin production systems that will eventually enable the formation of scales, feathers, and other protective structures begin their evolutionary development during this period, as proteins originally used for maintaining skin integrity undergo modifications that enhance their protective and waterproofing capabilities. These early experiments in keratin biochemistry provide the molecular foundation for the spectacular diversity of integumentary structures that will eventually characterize terrestrial vertebrates. The circulatory adaptations that support successful terrestrial living include fundamental reorganization of heart structure and blood vessel arrangements to accommodate the gravitational challenges and altered pressure relationships that characterize life outside the buoyant support of aquatic environments. The heart begins to develop the structural modifications that will eventually enable complete separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, improving the efficiency of oxygen delivery to tissues that must work harder to overcome gravitational resistance. The blood chemistry modifications that accompany terrestrial adaptation include changes to hemoglobin structure that enhance oxygen carrying capacity at the lower partial pressures characteristic of atmospheric environments, while also developing enhanced buffering systems that can maintain optimal pH balance despite the altered carbon dioxide elimination patterns associated with aerial respiration. These biochemical innovations represent invisible but crucial adaptations that enable the enhanced metabolic performance necessary for active terrestrial life. The respiratory system refinements that occur during this period involve not only improvements to lung structure and function, but also the development of more sophisticated neural control systems that can coordinate breathing patterns with the complex muscular activities required for terrestrial locomotion. The integration of respiratory and locomotor functions requires neural innovations that represent fundamental advances in vertebrate nervous system complexity. The digestive system adaptations that enable exploitation of terrestrial food resources include modifications to jaw structure and tooth design that enhance the ability to capture and process arthropod prey, while also developing the digestive biochemistry necessary to extract nutrition from the novel chemical compounds found in terrestrial plant and animal tissues. The evolution of more acidic stomach conditions and enhanced enzyme production represents crucial adaptations for processing the diverse array of food items available in terrestrial environments. The excretory system innovations that solve the water conservation challenges of terrestrial existence include the development of more efficient kidney function that can concentrate urine to minimize water loss, while effectively eliminating metabolic waste products. The evolution of the metanephric kidney represents one of the most important physiological innovations in vertebrate terrestrial adaptation, enabling effective osmoregulation in environments where water availability may be limited. The reproductive adaptations that free vertebrates from dependence on aquatic environments for successful reproduction represent perhaps the most revolutionary changes occurring during this period of terrestrial evolution. The development of internal fertilization mechanisms enables reproduction to occur independently of standing water, while the evolution of protective eggshells and enhanced yolk provisions allows embryonic development to proceed in terrestrial environments. The amniotic egg, one of evolution's most elegant solutions to the challenges of terrestrial reproduction, begins its development during this period as protective membranes evolve to create aquatic microenvironments within terrestrial eggs. The amnion, chorion, and allantois work together to provide the developing embryo with protection, gas exchange, and waste storage capabilities that enable successful development outside of aquatic environments. The parental care behaviors that enhance reproductive success in terrestrial environments become increasingly sophisticated during this period, as the challenges of protecting eggs and young from terrestrial predators and environmental hazards require more complex behavioral strategies than those needed in aquatic environments. The evolution of nest-building behaviors, territory defense, and extended parental care represents crucial behavioral innovations that support successful terrestrial reproduction. The sensory system adaptations that enable effective navigation and survival in complex terrestrial environments include enhanced visual capabilities for functioning in the varied light conditions that characterize forest ecosystems, improved auditory systems for detecting airborne sounds, and more sophisticated chemosensory capabilities for processing the diverse array of chemical signals present in terrestrial environments. The development of enhanced visual acuity and color discrimination capabilities enables more effective prey detection and predator avoidance in the complex visual environment of forests, while also facilitating the visual communication systems that will eventually characterize many terrestrial vertebrate societies. The evolution of sophisticated eye structures represents a crucial adaptation for success in the visually complex world of terrestrial environments. The auditory adaptations that enable detection and interpretation of airborne sounds include modifications to ear structure that enhance sensitivity to the frequency ranges most important for terrestrial communication and predator detection. The development of the tympanic membrane and associated structures represents a fundamental innovation that opens up entirely new channels for information gathering and social communication. The locomotor refinements that enable increasingly efficient terrestrial movement include continued evolution of limb structure and muscular systems, with particular emphasis on developing the precise motor control necessary for effective movement across irregular terrain and through dense vegetation. The neural control systems that coordinate complex locomotor activities undergo continuous refinement as terrestrial locomotion becomes more sophisticated and diverse. The metabolic adaptations that support the energy demands of terrestrial life include modifications to cellular respiration pathways that can efficiently utilize the enhanced oxygen availability of terrestrial environments while managing the increased energy costs associated with gravitational work and thermoregulation. These metabolic innovations enable the more active lifestyles that characterize successful terrestrial vertebrates. The thermoregulatory capabilities that enable effective temperature management in environments where water is not available for heat dissipation include both behavioral and physiological adaptations that can maintain optimal body temperatures across the range of thermal conditions encountered in terrestrial environments. The development of more sophisticated blood vessel arrangements and metabolic control systems represents crucial adaptations for terrestrial temperature management. The immune system enhancements that protect against the diverse array of pathogens present in terrestrial environments include more sophisticated cellular and humoral defense mechanisms that can respond effectively to bacteria, fungi, and other disease organisms that differ substantially from aquatic pathogens. The evolution of enhanced wound healing capabilities represents another crucial adaptation for survival in environments where mechanical injuries are more common than in aquatic habitats. The nervous system innovations that support the complex behaviors necessary for successful terrestrial living include enhanced cognitive capabilities for spatial navigation, memory systems that can store information about resource locations and seasonal patterns, and learning abilities that enable behavioral adaptation to the diverse challenges presented by terrestrial environments. The social behavior developments that emerge during this period include cooperative strategies for resource exploitation, information sharing about environmental conditions, and coordinated responses to predator threats. These early examples of terrestrial vertebrate sociality provide the foundation for the complex social systems that will eventually characterize many terrestrial vertebrate groups. The developmental flexibility that enables successful adaptation to varying environmental conditions becomes increasingly important as terrestrial vertebrates encounter the greater environmental variability that characterizes terrestrial compared to aquatic habitats. The ability to modify developmental trajectories in response to environmental cues represents a crucial adaptation for success in unpredictable terrestrial environments. The genetic regulatory innovations that control the expression of terrestrial adaptations include more sophisticated gene expression control systems that can coordinate the development and function of the multiple organ systems that must work together for successful terrestrial existence. These regulatory innovations enable the integrated physiological changes necessary for effective terrestrial adaptation. The biomechanical principles that govern efficient terrestrial locomotion drive continued refinement of skeletal geometry and muscle arrangement, with particular emphasis on optimizing the lever systems and joint structures that enable effective force transmission during terrestrial movement. The evolution of more sophisticated joint capsules and ligament systems represents crucial structural innovations for terrestrial locomotion. The ecological role diversification that occurs as vertebrates become more successful terrestrial organisms includes the occupation of new feeding niches and habitat types that were previously unexploited by vertebrate life. The evolution of herbivorous feeding strategies and the colonization of more arid terrestrial environments represent important ecological expansions that demonstrate the increasing terrestrial capabilities of evolving vertebrates. As the day progresses within this ancient forest sanctuary, and these remarkable creatures continue their patient work of evolutionary innovation, each small adaptation brings vertebrate life one step closer to the complete mastery of terrestrial existence that will eventually enable the colonization of every habitable environment on Earth's surface, from the driest deserts to the highest mountains, transforming our planet into the vertebrate-dominated world that we know today. As the golden afternoon light filters through the layered canopy of this magnificent Carboniferous forest, creating an ever-shifting mosaic of illumination and shadow on the forest floor below, we witness the emergence of something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. The first complex terrestrial ecosystems organized around vertebrate communities. These forest sanctuaries have become more than mere collections of individual organisms learning to survive on land. They have evolved into intricate webs of relationships and dependencies that demonstrate the remarkable creativity of evolution in developing new forms of biological organization. The atmospheric composition within these forest communities creates conditions that seem almost magical by modern standards, with oxygen concentrations hovering near 35% of the total atmosphere, enabling biological processes of extraordinary vigor and supporting organisms of sizes that would be impossible under contemporary atmospheric conditions. The enhanced oxygen availability accelerates metabolic processes and supports the energy-intensive lifestyles that characterize the increasingly sophisticated terrestrial vertebrates that populate these ancient woodlands. The temperature within the forest maintains its characteristic stability at 20 degrees Celsius, while the humidity approaches saturation levels that create an almost tropical greenhouse environment. Water droplets condense constantly on the vast surfaces of plant leaves and drip steadily to the forest floor, creating a gentle percussion that provides the acoustic backdrop for the activities of countless organisms that have made these forests their permanent home. The structural complexity of these Carboniferous forests creates a three-dimensional habitat matrix of unprecedented sophistication, with distinct communities of organisms occupying different vertical zones from the forest floor to the emergent canopy. Each level of this vertical ecosystem supports its own assemblage of vertebrate species, each adapted to exploit the specific resources and opportunities available at their preferred height above the ground. In the emergent canopy, where the tallest lepidodendron trees reach heights exceeding 40 meters, small tetrapods have evolved remarkable adaptations for arboreal life. These creatures, descendants of the amphibious pioneers who first ventured onto land, now demonstrate climbing abilities that rival those of modern arboreal vertebrates. Their digits have evolved enhanced gripping capabilities, while their tail structures have become more muscular and prehensile, enabling them to navigate the complex three-dimensional environment of the forest canopy with remarkable agility. The middle canopy, dominated by tree ferns and seed ferns that create dense layers of vegetation between 15 and 25 meters above the ground, supports its own distinctive community of vertebrates that have specialized for life in this intermediate zone. These creatures often display enhanced jumping abilities that enable them to move efficiently between branches and vegetation masses, while their sensory systems have evolved to function effectively in the filtered light conditions that characterize this forest layer. The understory environment, where smaller ferns and primitive flowering plants create dense thickets beneath the main canopy, provides habitat for terrestrial vertebrates that have retained closer ties to the moist conditions that characterize their amphibious heritage. These species often demonstrate the most sophisticated integration of aquatic and terrestrial capabilities, moving freely between the temporary pools and streams that meander through the forest floor and the terrestrial environments that provide their primary feeding and shelter opportunities. The forest floor itself has become a complex ecosystem where decomposer organisms work in partnership with various vertebrate species to create nutrient cycling systems of remarkable efficiency. Large terrestrial tetrapods move through this environment like living bulldozers, creating disturbances in the leaf litter that expose invertebrate prey while simultaneously facilitating the decomposition processes that maintain forest productivity. The invertebrate communities that form the foundation of these forest food webs demonstrate diversity and abundance that exceed anything found in modern terrestrial ecosystems. Giant millipedes, over 2 meters in length, process enormous quantities of dead plant material, while dragonflies with wingspans approaching 1 meter patrol the forest clearings. Centipedes nearly half a meter long hunt smaller arthropods through the leaf litter, while primitive spiders create webs of remarkable sophistication to capture the abundant flying insects that populate the forest airspace. The feeding relationships that connect these various organisms create food webs of extraordinary complexity, with multiple pathways for energy flow and nutrient cycling that demonstrate the remarkable ecological sophistication that has evolved within these forest communities. Herbivorous tetrapods have begun to exploit the abundant plant material directly, developing digestive systems capable of processing the tough, fibrous vegetation that characterizes Carboniferous plant communities. The predatory tetrapods that occupy the top positions in these forest food webs demonstrate remarkable diversity in hunting strategies and prey specialization. Some species have evolved to specialize in capturing the giant arthropods that populate these forests, developing enhanced speed and agility that enable them to successfully hunt prey items that often approach their own body size. Others have become specialists in capturing smaller, more numerous prey items, developing enhanced sensory capabilities and precision that enable them to exploit the abundant populations of smaller arthropods. The reproductive strategies that have evolved within these forest communities demonstrate remarkable innovation in solving the challenges of terrestrial reproduction, while taking advantage of the protected conditions that forest environments provide. Many species have developed elaborate courtship behaviors that utilize the acoustic properties of forest environments to facilitate mate recognition and pair formation, while others have evolved visual displays that take advantage of the complex light environments that forests create. The nest-building behaviors that characterize many forest-dwelling vertebrates demonstrate remarkable sophistication in utilizing the diverse materials and microhabitats that forest environments provide. Some species construct elaborate nests in tree hollows or among the dense root systems of giant ferns, while others create simple depressions in the forest floor that are lined with soft plant materials to provide optimal conditions for egg development. The territorial behaviors that have evolved within forest communities reflect the complex, three-dimensional nature of forest habitats, with different species defending territories that may overlap vertically while remaining spatially separated. The acoustic communication systems that enable territory maintenance in dense forest environments often involve low-frequency vocalizations that can penetrate vegetation and travel significant distances through the forest understory. The social organizations that emerge within these forest communities include both cooperative and competitive strategies that reflect the opportunities and challenges presented by complex forest ecosystems. Some species form loose aggregations that provide enhanced predator detection and resource location capabilities, while others develop more structured social hierarchies that enable efficient exploitation of forest resources. The seasonal patterns that govern forest community dynamics create temporal rhythms that coordinate the activities of multiple species and enable efficient resource utilization throughout the year. The reproductive cycles of different species often become synchronized with periods of optimal resource availability, while feeding and migration behaviors adapt to the seasonal changes in food abundance and environmental conditions. The dispersal mechanisms that enable genetic exchange between different forest communities include both active movement of adult organisms and passive transport of eggs and young through various environmental processes. The connectivity provided by continuous forest cover enables species to maintain genetic contact across large geographic areas while also facilitating the colonization of new forest habitats as they become available. The coevolutionary relationships that develop between different species within forest communities create positive feedback loops that enhance ecosystem stability and productivity. The activities of large herbivorous tetrapods create habitat modifications that benefit smaller species, while the waste products of vertebrate communities provide enhanced nutrition for the plant species that form the foundation of forest ecosystems. The predator-prey dynamics that operate within forest communities create complex selective pressures that drive continuous evolutionary innovation among both predators and prey species. The three-dimensional nature of forest habitats enables the evolution of escape strategies that would be impossible in simpler environments, while the abundance and diversity of prey species support the evolution of increasingly specialized predatory adaptations. The chemical communication systems that operate within forest communities include both airborne pheromones and chemical markers that provide information about individual identity, reproductive status, territorial boundaries, and resource locations. The complex air circulation patterns that characterize forest environments create opportunities for chemical communication that would not be available in more open terrestrial habitats. The microclimatic diversity that exists within forest environments enables the coexistence of species with different environmental requirements within the same general area, while also providing refugia that can support populations during periods of environmental stress. The thermal buffering that forest canopies provide creates more stable temperature conditions than those found in more exposed terrestrial environments. The nutrient cycling processes that operate within forest communities involve complex interactions between vertebrate and invertebrate decomposer organisms, with vertebrate waste products providing important sources of nutrients that support forest productivity. The spatial distribution of vertebrate activities creates patterns of nutrient availability that influence plant growth and community composition. The pathogen dynamics that operate within forest communities include both beneficial and harmful microorganisms that influence the health and survival of vertebrate populations. The evolution of enhanced immune responses and disease resistance mechanisms represents an ongoing arms race between vertebrate hosts and their microbial symbionts and parasites. The learning behaviors that enable successful exploitation of complex forest environments include spatial memory systems that allow individuals to navigate effectively through three-dimensional forest habitats, while also developing behavioral traditions that can be transmitted between generations. The cognitive demands of forest life drive the evolution of enhanced neural capabilities that will eventually support more sophisticated behavioral repertoires. The conservation strategies that emerge within forest communities include both individual and group behaviors that enhance survival during periods of environmental stress, while also developing resource management practices that ensure the long-term sustainability of forest ecosystems. The ability to modify habitat use patterns in response to resource availability represents an important adaptation for success in variable environments. The evolutionary innovations that emerge within forest communities include novel anatomical structures, physiological processes, and behavioral strategies that enable more effective exploitation of forest resources while also enhancing competitive ability within complex community structures. These innovations provide the foundation for the spectacular adaptive radiation of terrestrial vertebrates that will characterize later geological periods. As evening approaches and the forest communities settle into their nocturnal rhythms, the complex web of relationships that connects these various organisms continues to function with the precision and efficiency that characterize mature ecosystems, demonstrating that evolution has successfully created terrestrial biological communities that rival the complexity and productivity of the marine ecosystems for which vertebrate life originally emerged. Time moves forward with its inexorable rhythm, carrying us from the lush abundance of the Carboniferous coal forests into a new chapter of Earth's history that will test the terrestrial adaptations of vertebrate life in ways that evolution has not yet demanded. The transition from the late Carboniferous into the Permian period brings with it climatic changes that transform the very character of terrestrial environments, creating challenges that will drive the final innovations necessary for vertebrates to achieve complete independence from their aquatic origins. The atmospheric changes that herald this new era begin subtly, but gather momentum with each passing millennium. As oxygen concentrations that had reached extraordinary heights during the Carboniferous period begin their gradual decline toward more moderate levels. The oxygen-rich atmosphere that had supported giant arthropods and enabled the remarkable biological productivity of the coal forest slowly transforms into something more similar to modern atmospheric conditions, requiring new metabolic strategies for organisms adapted to the energy abundance of high-oxygen environments. The global climate patterns that had maintained the warm, humid conditions favorable to widespread forest development begin to shift toward cooler and more variable conditions as continental configurations change and ocean circulation patterns reorganize themselves in response to the ongoing dance of plate tectonics. The stable greenhouse conditions that had characterized much of the Carboniferous period give way to more seasonal climate patterns that create greater environmental variability and place new demands on the adaptive capabilities of terrestrial organisms. Picture yourself standing in what was once a magnificent forest sanctuary, now transformed by the patient work of climate change into something entirely different. The towering lepidodendron trees that had dominated these landscapes for millions of years have largely disappeared, their massive trunks now preserved only as fossil impressions in the sedimentary rocks that will one day tell their story to future paleontologists. In their place, new types of vegetation have evolved that represent evolution's response to the changing environmental conditions. The temperature patterns that now characterize this transformed landscape show much greater variation than the stable conditions that had prevailed during the height of the coal forest period, with daytime temperatures that may reach 35 degrees Celsius, while nighttime cooling brings temperatures down to 15 degrees or lower. This thermal variability creates new challenges for organisms that had evolved under the stable conditions of the forest greenhouse environment. The humidity levels that had approached saturation throughout the Carboniferous forest now fluctuate dramatically with the changing seasons and weather patterns, creating periods of abundant moisture alternating with times of significant aridity that test the water conservation abilities of terrestrial organisms. The reliable moisture that had characterized forest environments becomes a seasonal resource that requires careful management and conservation strategies. The vegetation communities that emerge in response to these changing conditions demonstrate remarkable evolutionary innovation as plants adapt to less predictable water availability and more variable temperature regimes. The new plant assemblages that colonize these transformed landscapes include the first true seed plants, which possess enhanced drought tolerance and reproductive strategies that enable them to thrive under the more challenging environmental conditions. The conifers that begin to dominate many terrestrial landscapes during this period represent evolution's solution to the challenges of survival in more arid environments, with needle-like leaves that minimize water loss and root systems that can extract moisture from deeper soil layers. These hardy plants create new types of terrestrial ecosystems that differ fundamentally from the dense, humid forests of the Carboniferous period. The fauna that inhabits these changing landscapes faces unprecedented challenges as the reliable moisture and stable temperatures that had characterized their evolutionary environment give way to conditions that demand new levels of physiological sophistication and behavioral flexibility. The vertebrates that will survive this transition must develop enhanced capabilities for water conservation, temperature regulation, and resource management that exceed anything required during their earlier evolutionary history. The amphibious tetrapods that had thrived in the moist forest environments of the Carboniferous period now face environmental conditions that push their physiological capabilities to their limits and beyond. Many lineages that have been successful forest dwellers find themselves unable to adapt to the new conditions and gradually disappear from the fossil record, while others undergo rapid evolutionary changes that enhance their terrestrial capabilities. The survivors of this environmental transition demonstrate remarkable innovations in water conservation physiology, developing more efficient kidney function that can concentrate urine to unprecedented levels while maintaining effective waste elimination. The evolution of more sophisticated integumentary water barriers enables these organisms to venture into environments that would have been lethal to their ancestors, while enhanced behavioral thermoregulation allows them to exploit the thermal variability of their new environments. The reproductive strategies that evolve in response to these changing conditions include enhanced protection for developing embryos through improved eggshell design and increased yolk provisions that support longer developmental periods. The evolution of more sophisticated nest-building behaviors enables successful reproduction in environments where surface water for traditional amphibian reproduction may not be reliably available. The dietary adaptations that enable survival in these transformed ecosystems include enhanced ability to process plant materials that are tougher and more fibrous than the lush vegetation of Carboniferous forests, while also developing more efficient hunting strategies for capturing prey in more open environments where cover and concealment opportunities are reduced. The emergence of the first true reptiles during this period represents evolution's ultimate solution to the challenges of terrestrial existence, as these remarkable organisms develop the complete suite of adaptations necessary for life entirely independent of standing water. Their scaly skin provides effective protection against water loss, while their advanced kidney function enables survival in environments where water conservation is crucial for survival. The amniotic eggs that characterize these advanced tetrapods represent one of evolution's most elegant innovations, creating portable aquatic environments that enable reproduction to occur in the driest terrestrial conditions. The sophisticated membrane systems that surround developing embryos provide all the benefits of aquatic development, while protecting against the challenges of terrestrial environments. The behavioral adaptations that emerge during this period of environmental challenge include enhanced seasonal migration strategies that enable organisms to track favorable conditions across larger geographic areas, while also developing food storage and caching behaviors that provide security during periods of resource scarcity. The social organizations that develop in response to environmental variability often involve cooperative strategies for resource sharing and information exchange that enhance survival during challenging periods, while also developing more sophisticated territorial systems that enable effective management of limited resources. The physiological innovations that enable survival under increasingly arid conditions include enhanced blood chemistry that maintains optimal function despite reduced water availability, while also developing more efficient cellular metabolism that can operate effectively under the reduced oxygen conditions that characterize the changing atmosphere. The sensory adaptations that support survival in more open environments include enhanced visual capabilities for detecting threats and opportunities across greater distances, while also developing more sophisticated auditory systems that can function effectively in the different acoustic environments created by more open landscapes. The locomotor refinements that adapt tetrapods for life in more open environments include enhanced speed and endurance capabilities that enable escape from predators across terrain that offers limited concealment opportunities, while also developing more efficient movement strategies that minimize energy expenditure during resource-seeking activities. The thermoregulatory capabilities that enable effective temperature management in environments with greater thermal variability include both behavioral and physiological adaptations that can maintain optimal body temperatures across wider ranges of environmental conditions, while also developing enhanced tolerance for temperature extremes that would have been lethal to earlier amphibious forms. The metabolic adaptations that support life under more challenging environmental conditions include more efficient energy storage and utilization systems that can sustain organisms during periods of resource scarcity, while also developing enhanced ability to enter dormant states that reduce energy requirements during unfavorable environmental periods. The immune system enhancements that protect against the diverse pathogens present in more variable environments include more sophisticated disease resistance mechanisms that can respond effectively to the broader range of environmental stresses that characterize these changing ecosystems. The developmental flexibility that enables successful adaptation to unpredictable environmental conditions becomes increasingly important as organisms face greater environmental variability. With enhanced ability to modify developmental trajectories in response to environmental cues that indicate optimal adaptive strategies. The evolutionary innovations that emerge in response to environmental challenge include novel anatomical structures, physiological processes, and behavioral strategies that enable more effective exploitation of resources while also enhancing survival capabilities under increasingly demanding environmental conditions. The ecological relationships that develop within these transformed ecosystems demonstrate remarkable resilience and creativity as organisms adapt to new environmental realities while maintaining the essential functions that support ecosystem productivity and stability. The biogeographic patterns that emerge as organisms respond to changing environmental conditions include enhanced dispersal capabilities that enable colonization of new habitats as they become available, while also developing enhanced tolerance for environmental barriers that might have been insurmountable for less well-adapted predecessors. The extinction processes that eliminate less well-adapted lineages create opportunities for the radiation of more sophisticated forms that possess the adaptations necessary for success under the new environmental conditions, demonstrating the creative potential of evolutionary processes operating under environmental pressure. The conservation strategies that emerge within these challenged ecosystems include both individual and community-level adaptations that enhance survival during periods of environmental stress, while also maintaining the genetic diversity necessary for continued evolutionary innovation. As the transformation of terrestrial environments continues and the great drying reshapes the face of the planet, the vertebrates that survive this crucible of environmental change emerge as organisms truly capable of thriving in any terrestrial environment that Earth can provide. Having acquired through this trial by environmental fire the complete suite of adaptations that will enable them to colonize every corner of the terrestrial world and establish the vertebrate-dominated ecosystems that will characterize our planet for hundreds of millions of years to come. As we reach the end of our journey through deep time and prepare to return to our own modern world, we find ourselves standing once again on the shores of possibility, but now with the profound understanding that comes from witnessing one of evolution's greatest achievements unfold across the vast expanse of geological time. The story we have followed from those first tentative gasps of air in Devonian shallows to the complete mastery of terrestrial existence achieved by Permian reptiles represents far more than simply the history of how vertebrates learn to walk on land. It is the foundation story of our own existence and that of every terrestrial vertebrate that has ever lived. The warm evening air that surrounds us carries the sense of a world transformed, where the descendants of those first brave pioneers now populate every conceivable terrestrial habitat from the wettest swamps to the driest deserts, from sea level to the highest mountains, demonstrating the remarkable success of the evolutionary experiment that began with simple modifications to fish swim bladders and primitive fin structures. The temperature holds steady at a comfortable 25 degrees Celsius, perfect for reflecting on the magnitude of the transformation we have witnessed. The fossil record that preserves the evidence of this remarkable journey lies scattered across the globe in rocks that span hundreds of millions of years, each fossil representing a moment frozen in time when some ancient creature lived and died and was fortunate enough to be preserved for future discovery. In the limestone quarries of Scotland, the delicate skeletons of early tetrapods like Acanthostega tell the story of those first experiments in terrestrial locomotion. Their 8-toed feet preserve an exquisite detail that reveals the experimental nature of early terrestrial adaptations. The coal deposits that formed during the Carboniferous period preserve not only the remains of the magnificent forest that provided sanctuary for evolving terrestrial vertebrates, but also the trackways and trace fossils that document their daily activities. In these ancient rocks, paleontologists can follow the footprints of creatures that walked through primeval swamps over 300 million years ago, reading stories of behavior and ecology written in stone with a fidelity that exceeds many historical documents. The red sandstones of the Permian period contain the fossils of the first truly terrestrial vertebrates. creatures whose adaptations were so successful that their basic body plan and physiological innovations continue to characterize terrestrial vertebrates today. The skulls and skeletons preserved in these rocks reveal the sophisticated anatomical solutions that evolution developed to solve the challenges of terrestrial existence, from the complex jaw structures that enabled efficient processing of terrestrial food to the advanced kidney systems that made water conservation possible. The molecular legacy of these ancient pioneers lives on in every terrestrial vertebrate alive today, as the genetic innovations that enabled the transition from water to land continue to function in the cells of modern amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The genes that control lung development in human embryos can trace their ancestry back to the air-breathing fish of the Devonian period, while the neural circuits that coordinate walking in modern vertebrates reflect the locomotor innovations of those first tetrapods who ventured onto Paleozoic shores. The physiological systems that enable terrestrial life in modern vertebrates bear the unmistakable signatures of their ancient origins, modified and refined through hundreds of millions of years of evolution, but still recognizably derived from the innovations that first appeared in those pioneering creatures of the Paleozoic era. The kidneys that concentrate urine in desert mammals utilize the same basic principles that were first developed by early reptiles, while the lungs that enable birds to fly at high altitudes represent elaborations of the air-breathing organs that first evolved in Devonian fish. The behavioral repertoires that characterize modern terrestrial vertebrates include countless elements that can be traced back to the innovations of their ancient predecessors, from the territorial behaviors that were first developed by early tetrapods to the parental care strategies that enabled successful terrestrial reproduction. The complex social organizations of modern vertebrates build upon communication systems and cooperation strategies that first evolved in the forest communities of the Carboniferous period. The ecological principles that govern modern terrestrial ecosystems reflect the fundamental relationships that were first established when vertebrates began to exploit terrestrial resources and create the complex food webs that characterize land-based communities. The predator-prey dynamics that structure modern ecosystems operate according to rules that were first established when early tetrapods began hunting terrestrial arthropods, while the nutrient cycling processes that maintain ecosystem productivity utilize mechanisms that were pioneered by the first terrestrial decomposer communities. The evolutionary innovations that enabled the transition from water to land continue to inspire modern scientific research and technological development, as researchers study the biomechanics of ancient locomotion to design more effective robotic systems, investigate the physiology of water conservation to develop better medical treatments, and explore the genetic mechanisms of adaptation to create more resilient crop plants. The conservation implications of understanding this ancient transition become increasingly important as modern environments change rapidly and terrestrial vertebrates face new challenges that test their adaptive capabilities. The knowledge gained from studying how vertebrates successfully navigated past environmental changes provides crucial insights for protecting modern species and ecosystems as they confront the environmental challenges of the contemporary world. The philosophical significance of this evolutionary achievement extends far beyond its biological importance, as the transition from water to land represents one of the most dramatic expansions of life's possibilities in the history of our planet. The courage and persistence demonstrated by those first vertebrates who ventured beyond the familiar boundaries of their aquatic origins offers inspiration for our own efforts to explore new frontiers and expand the boundaries of human possibility. The educational value of this story continues to inspire new generations of students and researchers who discover in the fossil record evidence of life's remarkable creativity and resilience. The museums and universities around the world that house collections of these ancient fossils serve as temples to evolutionary achievement, where visitors can see tangible evidence of the deep connections that link all life on Earth across the vast expanse of geological time. The technological applications that emerge from studying ancient locomotion and physiology include everything from improved prosthetic devices based on the biomechanics of tetrapod limbs to enhanced water purification systems inspired by the efficiency of vertebrate kidneys. The innovations that enabled life to conquer land continue to provide solutions for modern engineering challenges. The artistic and cultural impact of understanding our deep evolutionary heritage enriches human culture in countless ways, from the scientific illustrations that bring ancient creatures to life in our imaginations to the literary works that explore the philosophical implications of our connections to the ancient past. The story of vertebrate terrestrialization has become part of humanity's greatest narrative, the epic tale of life's expansion across our planet. The research frontiers that continue to expand our understanding of this ancient transition include new fossil discoveries that fill gaps in our knowledge of early terrestrial vertebrates, advanced analytical techniques that reveal previously hidden details of ancient physiology and behavior, and comparative studies that illuminate the genetic and developmental mechanisms underlying terrestrial adaptations. The global perspective that emerges from studying this worldwide phenomenon reveals the universal nature of evolutionary principles while also highlighting the unique local conditions that influence the specific pathways taken by different lineages in different parts of the world. The terrestrial vertebrates of ancient Gondwana faced different challenges and developed different solutions than their contemporaries in Laurasia, yet all succeeded in making the fundamental transition from aquatic to terrestrial existence. The temporal perspective that encompasses hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary time provides profound insights into the pace and pattern of evolutionary change, revealing that even the most dramatic biological innovations typically unfold gradually across countless generations through the accumulation of small modifications that eventually produce revolutionary capabilities. The interconnectedness revealed through studying ancient ecosystems emphasizes the cooperative nature of evolutionary innovation, as a successful transition to terrestrial life required not only the evolution of vertebrates themselves, but also the prior colonization of land by plants, fungi, and arthropods that created the ecosystems that could support terrestrial vertebrate communities. The resilience demonstrated by life throughout this transition provides hope and inspiration for addressing modern environmental challenges, as the fossil record reveals countless examples of organisms successfully adapting to dramatic environmental changes through evolutionary innovation and ecological flexibility. The beauty and wonder of this ancient world, preserved forever in the patient testimony of stone, continues to inspire awe and curiosity in everyone who encounters these remarkable fossils and learns their stories. The delicate preservation of an early tetrapod skeleton or the massive trackway of an ancient reptile speaks across hundreds of millions of years to remind us of the deep connections that link all life on Earth. As you prepare to drift off to peaceful sleep, carry with you the knowledge that you are part of this magnificent story, that the breath you draw into your lungs utilizes innovations first developed by ancient fish, that the steps you take across the ground employ locomotor strategies pioneered by early tetrapods, and that the very cells of your body preserve the molecular legacy of those first brave vertebrates who ventured from water onto land and opened up entire new worlds of possibility. For all their descendants, sleep peacefully, knowing that you are the inheritor of one of evolution's greatest achievements, a living testament to the creativity and persistence of life, connected across deep time to all the remarkable creatures who contributed to the magnificent story of how vertebrates learned to walk upon the land and transform our planet into the vibrant, terrestrial world we know and cherish today.